Okay, remember that they are changing my voice. So, I want there to be a ceasefire in Ukraine. I've said this more times than you might think. I've said in the comments. I was probably the first person to make a video and post it on YouTube about human trafficking in Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken, with an emphasis on the greater system of human trafficking that occurs when you have a nation that is not as powerful as the most powerful nations. It's being invaded or there's some kind of war going on. Okay, so I talked about this big time. I talked about Ukraine pretty significantly when the conflict first broke out. The same thing with Israel and Palestine. So I want ceasefires there. Obviously, it's pretty straightforward who's in the right and who's wrong and what the political propaganda is and so on and so forth. Okay. Also on the issue of immigration, right? All the agencies involved, HSI, DEA, FBI, ICE, CBP, what have you, and all the other agencies they collaborate with. This is an example of a bunch of people coming together to do the bidding of the governing class. If it wasn't commonly acknowledged, they'd probably say I was a conspiracy theorist if I said there's a bunch of people coming together and deporting people, and there's all kinds of people from different agencies involved. I mean, it's that bad. People won't even admit something as obvious as that these days. And if it wasn't openly admitted, they wouldn't admit that there's a massive organization called MAGA, or a massive movement, with various organizations working together, the Klan, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, what have you. Okay, and many, 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 many more. Groups of friends, corporations, right? MAGA is basically a massive conspiracy. Another conspiracy is the idea that people should magically meet halfway between two groups of corrupt politicians who are both in the pockets of the governing class. And what the hell? You call that a conspiracy theory? That's what they try to do. What do you think a bipartisan committee is? So when we look at the policies, there's people who would say, hey, this is happening this particular way, which causes a lot of distress and trouble and mental health issues and financial, woes, what have you, because people didn't magically meet halfway between the devil and his wife or something. It's fucking retarded. It is so stupid. If we had logical public discourse, rigorous intellectual debate, if we had a sane system, a system worth fighting for, if we had a system that was actually worth fighting for, not just some propaganda nonsense where people get killed for propaganda nonsense, there would be a region for immigrants on top of a logical immigration process. So people who come here illegally would be few and far between, if any, and they would go to the region that's for them. Okay, and we'd tax them at a slightly higher rate, and we'd build tiny homes for them, cheap apartment units, small houses, and their rent would be less. So overall, they would clearly contribute more to the economy than the average American when all is said and done. So there goes that argument. But it's also a society of social engineering, where they use the idea of eugenics. They try to improve certain racial qualities and impair other racial qualities in the name of really conservatism, which has contaminated both parties really from their inception, from the start. Both parties used to be merged in one in the first place anyway. The Democratic Republicans, that was a party, look it up. Back then with the Federalist Party, the Whig Party, what have you. It's part of the history of this nation. So they're basically just two white supremacist parties where there's token minorities who pretend to care, with some, whites, Jews, LGBT people who pretend to care, who just uphold the elite's agenda. The people who would argue that that's not the case, again, if MAGA wasn't admitted, they would argue that MAGA is a conspiracy theory. Okay? It's stupid. You think MAGA is the first time in this country's history when massive groups of white supremacists got together to try to control things and got token minorities to vouch for them? Then you're insane if that's what you think. If that's what you think, you're crazy. Look up the golden age of fraternities. A huge number, a huge percentage of the adult population were all in fraternities. If you're not in a fraternity, how much do you know about fraternities? Not very much, because they're basically secret societies in their own right. So what do you call it when a bunch of white supremacists get in a bunch of groups that are basically secret societies in their own right, and some of them are secret societies like the Freemasons, and they manipulate things behind the scenes, and they have extrajudicial meetings, and they hang people? What the fuck do you call that? It's a massive conspiracy. Most of this nation's history has on record massive conspiracies taking place. And if you're paying attention, it's all this nation's history. Why isn't there a ceasefire in Ukraine? Because they're waiting for some dumb fucking shit to occur and to play out so they can push their long-term agenda. Because when you're a global governing class with proxy governments everywhere, and you're corporate partnerships, transnational organizations, conglomerates, what have you, you have the power to engineer long-term. And when you're a bunch of spoiled brat families who throw bitch fits because people aren't worshiping you and they don't see you as gods, okay, you cancel cultures that are more likely to produce people who don't kiss your ass and pretend you're superior. Any questions?